Welcome everyone to Los Libertinos podcast. I am your host, Carlos Abelard, and this is Chingazos and Fire episode number 23. Our guest today is Ben Burgis. He is a philosopher, professor at Georgia State University, Perimeter College. He is an author of 4 books. His most recent one is called Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, a critique of the contemporary left. He is also a columnist for the Jacobin magazine, and he hosts his own podcast called Give Them an Argument. And he will be co-teaching a class in January at Renegade University with Thad Russell. So I'll put a link in the show notes so you guys can attend that class, and you guys can catch me there too, because I'll be attending that class as well. So thanks, Ben, for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Okay, fair enough. And just for anybody that might not know who you are, and especially like on my end, where a lot of family and friends that have been tuning in don't know a lot of the political realms that I get into. Can you kind of give a background on your born and raised family, siblings, education, and kind of all your kind of background run that you'd normally give on these kind of things,
Sure. Well, I mean, I don't know how much I normally get into all that, but I can do it a little bit now. I was born and raised in mid-Michigan. I always like to tell people, since this is true, and it's just kind of funny that where I was, East Lansing, had to drive about an hour and a half south to get to the nearest Canadian border crossing, Detroit, Windsor. Just, the way that works out, with Michigan and Ontario there. I have a brother and a sister. My brother is he actually, he lives in Los Angeles now. He's had different jobs in like kind of the entertainment industry. Like he's worked on some Netflix shows. He was like the art director for Robot Chicken for a while. But my sister is a writer. She writes like children's fantasy novels. She actually lives in the UK now, because she was there for grad school, and she ended up dropping out, but she married a British guy, and so that's where she is. I mean, I guess in terms of I don't know, let's see, what else do you ask about education? So so when I got out of high school, I started off at Lansing Community College, mostly because I was, maybe a little bit for money reasons, but mostly because the last couple of years of high school, I was enjoying the skipping class and getting high parts of that experience too much to get very good grades in high school. So would certainly not have been able to get a 4-year degree of any kind, if I hadn't had to the community college there. But I think, like, I don't know, certain kind of, I think it might be a personality type thing, but when I actually, didn't really care very much about high school, but when I got to college, I liked that because, I could take classes that interested me and, and all of that. And so I got into it, ended up transferring to like a small liberal arts college you haven't heard of, since nobody has, in Grand Rapids. And I was a double major in philosophy and history. And I ended up going to grad school in philosophy. And I guess, even though, the politics that I have now are roughly, what I had then. I don't think I'm so dogmatic that I've haven't changed my mind about absolutely anything, but the basic worldview, was the same, as it is now. But throughout the time, really, I was in grad school, almost entirely, that was like really separate from what I was doing academically. That, what I was doing as an academic, was just sort of like, philosophy for the sake of philosophy, not really tied to politics. So I ended up doing stuff about like logical paradoxes, and that's kind of where I ended up going with that. But and then I got out of, I finished up my PhD at the University of Miami. So I got to, for better or for worse, it's a weird place to go to grad school. Like the sort of, Miami is a place with.
That's a big change. Wait, you were up in the cold, and then you ended up by the beach.
Yeah. And some of that was some of it was on purpose. Like when I got after I finished up college, I got my master's at Western Michigan in Kalamazoo, which was like was always where I was planning to go for that, because it's like right down the street, and I kind of knew, essentially, what the program was and all that. But then I remember when I was like picking places to apply for PhD programs, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Kalamazoo, and it was just like blizzarding outside, snow blowing everywhere. And I was like looking through this list of this like rankings of philosophy programs. I was like, California or Florida sounds really nice right now. Like let's apply to a bunch of these places. And I actually remember like they flew down like the first pick, like prospective grad students that led into the program. They flew everybody down for this like recruitment weekend in 2006. And I remember like after dinner, we're out at the Clevelander, which is this like outdoor bar, on South Beach. It's like off of, so it's like Lincoln Road's here, right? It's Ocean Drive, so it's like right here. And so, we're sitting outside, and, I think I was having like a rum and Coke, and I could see it's like row of palm trees. You can kind of sit, see the ocean, go through it. I just remember saying, God damn it, I hope I don't get anywhere better. So because I really want to go here. But, it's a weird place to go for that, right? Because it's if anybody who's ever been to Miami, let's put it this way, right? The ratio, the the ratio of the strip club to library ratio is not what it would, it's a strange place to go to graduate school, but I did do that. And then when I got out, this is, I feel old. This is like 11 years ago we're talking about now. I had, I ended up getting a job at the University of Ulsan in South Korea. So it's like I'm from Michigan, so I started to do the automatic thing where I like take out my hand to like show you where it is. But like Seoul, which is obviously the biggest city in Korea, is like right up kind of at the top of the country, like the sort of by the border with North Korea, like sort of the top left, and Ulsan's kind of the bottom right, so it was a long train trip, but it's like a decent sized kind of industrial town, and like a lot of places like that, they're really pushing bilingual.
You got a job there?
Yeah. I worked there for a year, so it was just like a 1-year gig, but
what was it, or what did you do, man? I mean, that's even more unique than going to Miami for college. You got a job in Korea, South Korea?
Yeah. So like a lot of universities there, they really push like English, and you have to take a certain number of classes in English, and they also like you have to take a certain number of classes in your like major in English. So they'd hire, it's just like kind of a rotating 1-year thing, but like they'd hire somebody in different departments, teach classes that subject in English. So I was like a philosophy professor there, but it was it was a really, I mean, it was a really weird experience. I have really mixed feelings about it, because like on the one hand, I actually really loved living there a lot, but on the other hand, like just because there's some bureaucratic requirement that you have to take a certain number of classes in English, doesn't necessarily mean you should be taking that class in English, right? Like it's that's a mixed bag, and then also a lot of Korean students are kind of socialized much more so than American students to just sort of like, sit down, shut up, and take notes. So like you're trying to have class discussions, and it's can be strange,
So what, they didn't really
but yeah,
engage? They didn't engage like what?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly, yeah. Um, so like that year, spent a lot. I mean, I had a lot of time. All right, is this getting through it all, or people, like just sort of politely, nodding, like, but yeah, and it was, and like being there. I mean, I guess in Ulsan especially because it's a, it's like I said, it's a decent sized town. But then like pretty much anybody there, who's like from an English speaking country, um, is was pretty much like, I was like the only person I knew who wasn't an English teacher, right? That's where everybody else who'd like you'd see at an expat bar or whatever, that's what they were all doing. If I was in Busan instead of Ulsan, it would have been like English teacher or soldier, but like, that was far enough from the military base. There's pretty much English teachers, but there were like enough that there were like a handful of like expat bars that would, you know, and you walked into any of them, it was always like cheers, right? It's like small enough that everybody knows who you are, and and all that stuff. And then
that's I was cool, man. That sounds cool.
Yeah, no, it was like I said. I mean, like I really enjoyed being there a lot. And yeah, I mean, it was just just being immersed in something really different. It was good. And back in 2000, and back in 2010 too, they've changed a little bit since then, but like back in 2010, it was like felt like being in the TV show Mad Men or something, like like you could smoke everywhere, like etc. But then and then yeah, I actually ended up, all told, I ended up being in Korea for 3 years. So I had that job for a year, and then I had like a 2-year thing at Yonsei University, which is like kind of in the suburbs of Seoul. But even though it's the suburbs of Seoul, it's like Ulsan was like really fun to live in. Like where I was in there is in Songdo, which is like it's like this very planned, kind of place, So it's not like, it's not like living in Ulsan. You have all these little restaurants and bars that have like grown up naturally over the course of the last 30 years, right? It's like kind of sterile and whatever, but at least you could like, I mean, it's like living in like, it's like if you live in some not very interesting part of New Jersey, but at least you could hop on a train and you're in New York. It was like kind of that for Seoul. But I guess by the time, I mean, I guess the way I've been kind of telling the story so far has been just sort of like education, job, all that stuff. But, I guess to sort of go back, you can tell it in a different way and talk a little bit more about politics. And so I could talk, like I had like back in like 2000, 2002, 2003, when I was like finishing up college, I was really involved in the like anti-Iraq war movement. I actually graduated like a semester late because of that, because I was like sort of so consumed in that that I that like it's like a graduation requirement that anybody with a pulse should have been able to pass, that like I just blew off, because I was like going to meetings and protests all the time, and and so I actually started grad school a semester late because of that. But I guess sometime, so that was like, so that was like 2002, 2003, was very kind of up through like maybe 2004, was like very politically active with stuff like that. But then I kind of stopped being that, right? Like I still thought everything I always thought, but I don't know, it all just seemed like there really didn't seem to be much point, right? None of it seemed to accomplish very much. And I was just doing other things with my life. So like, I always say like the only like real, like the only way that like, radical politics really affected, like, intersected with my life at all was that like, I would go, when I was, I'd like, read Glenn Greenwald columns at salon.com about like, Obama and drones and stuff, and sort of use them as cheat sheets when I was out at the bar with my liberal friends and argued with them about all that, but that was kind of it. Right. But then, I guess trying to sort of piece this back together, like by the time I finished the second stint in Korea, right? There was like a year that I was Ilsan, that was like back in Miami, and just scraping together some adjunct classes for a couple of years, which is, when I met my wife and all this, but like then I was back in Korea for a couple of years for the Yonsei job. And I think by the time that was over, it felt like enough had changed that I started to feel feel like I should be doing more politically. And I had, I guess, and certainly by 2015, when Bernie Sanders was, started to run for president, for the first time, like that felt to me like an opening for something real. And, and so I sort of gradually became more politically involved after that. But then like, skipping ahead a lot, right? Like in like 2018, I partially because my friend Doug Lane, who's the editor at Zero Books, or was the editor at Zero Books, kind of pushed this, idea to me. Like it sort of occurred to me finally that there was like a way of combining, my interests, right? That I was never really, even though like what I was doing, hadn't really previously been, political philosophy, whatever, that, the kind of trading that I felt like I got in, and sort of, breaking apart arguments and putting them back together again and all that stuff, that there was a way to sort of make this politically useful. And I wrote this first book, Give Them an Argument, which was all about, like trying to convince people on my side to like kind of take getting the arguments right a little bit more seriously. I think there's a certain way that, I would see people, the least funny thing you could do to a joke is to try to break down how much of it is serious and how much of it is a joke. But like, I would see people do all this sort of eye rolling snark, and people would talk about, logic or fallacies or whatever. And, and I was kind of tried to push back against that a little bit. So I wrote that book, and then I ended up, kind of as a result of that, in an indirect way, after, I met the late Michael Brooks, I started doing this weekly segment on his show, TMBS Michael Brooks show, called the Debunk, where we'd like sort of look at bad arguments and break them down. And I guess, yeah, I mean, I guess there are a lot of ways we could go from here, but like one way to sort of try to, I mean, I guess one sort of pretty direct route back to where we started would just be to say like that in the course of, I'm obviously skipping a lot here because I don't want to like bore people with like 3 hours of details, but like in the over the course of kind of several years of being a little bit, being more involved in kind of lefty democratic socialist politics, and doing stuff like the Debunk segment, and and I started like doing a lot of public debates, like I did, I don't know, Stefan Molyneux, and the just now last month, Charlie Kirk, but I ended up after Michael died, I ended up starting, my own show, and I don't actually, not 100% sure I remember how this happened, but I definitely, um, yeah, I think I might have seen like a video. This was definitely after he'd already died, but I might have seen a video on YouTube of Michael talking to Thad, either on the unregistered podcast, or like when he did the thing at Renegade University. That was definitely some part of this at some point. I know I was like vaguely aware of him for a long time. I used to listen to this podcast called The Nostalgia Trap. I remember listening to Thad being interviewed on there a long time ago. And anyway, somehow or another, like, it kind of came across my radar again, and I thought he might be an interesting guest for the show, and I had him on. And that actual like first appearance, wasn't great. Like it was sort of like I think we were on like really different wavelengths with it, with like sort of like what that conversation could be.
Liked it. I thought it was cool. I jammed it a couple of days ago. I thought it was cool.
All right, that's good. The first one, so he was on a couple times.
Yeah. The first one, it was like it was like 8 or 9 months ago or something like that. Or
that sounds. I don't know. It all time all runs.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are like intellectual. You guys have like PhD, so like, you could see there's a little bit of and if you have a show called give them the argument, and you do debates, I mean, anybody's gonna come in knowing that you're ready to throw chingazos, at any point, because you're gonna get down, So, but I thought it was cool. But yeah.
Okay, that's good. So anyway, but I think that like, so he was on, twice. The second time he was on was the one where like it was like really all over the place. Although I actually thought that one was better, but like, we were like talking about, like, there was a while where we were arguing about postmodernism. There's a while where we were arguing about the election. It was pretty scattered. But I think that like what was actually in some ways more interesting to me than the on-air conversation was when we talked a little bit just before to like sort of, like feel out a little bit, what to talk about. And I think that conversation, we're kind of getting into like the, like political background and like, and sort of where he'd come out of and all that stuff. And I think, I think what I got like, and, I think that was maybe in some ways, the beginning of, some of this sort of like mutual fascination, because I think that even though like, whatever, I like history, I enjoy watching, UFC or whatever, like that there are definitely some, some shared interest there. But like, I think, but like, I don't know. I think what maybe both of us got out of that conversation was a sort of sense that like, all right, this is a really interesting guy. And there's a sense in which like, if you look at kind of like the first part of our lives, like some of it feels really similar, but like it's almost like this like mirror universe thing, right? Sort of like, zigged when I zagged, right? So anyway, I ended up teaching another RU class not too long after that. Anyway, which was just called like how to make an argument. He kind of like sat in on it and helped facilitate it and stuff. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, that was like my first. So that was like my second time teaching something like kind of outside of like a regular university context, right? So like I'd had Before that, I taught a class at Michael Albert's thing. It's the School for Social and Cultural Change, which is, again, it's like a sort of Zoom, deal. But I don't really like both of those in different ways. But what I really liked about both of them was that in both cases, it's like, okay, I've taught a lot of I've taught a lot of classes at a lot of places, sort of ranging from like, Miami-Dade College to, a couple of universities in Korea to Rutgers, Snatch up there for a while, for like a few years, to Georgia State, where I actually didn't renew it like the sort of last time, because like at the end of last year, I kind of got to the point with everything else I'm doing, with the Jacobin writing of the show and everything, where I felt like I had about 3 full-time jobs and it was too much. But but like, taught a lot of classes, a lot of places, but I think that there's something really liberating about teaching in a context where it's not, nobody's getting a grade, nobody's, like nobody's like trying to like meet a graduation requirement, like the only reason anybody is there is that they're intensely interested in the subject, and that's just like that's just an amazingly different experience, and it's a
Yeah, I mean that's why I'm excited, because like you guys, like I'm saying, like you guys did go at it like a little bit, it was very respectful, but like that's his, like you guys are gonna co-teach it, but the way he's kind of been presenting it is that it's going to be back and forward, little arguments back and forward, and you're entering his dojo, right?
Right.
But so that given like I'm interested, I'm a fight fan, so I like boxing and stuff like that, but you guys are going to be kind of sparring a little bit of in ideas, and sometimes when both sides can get in a good sparring session, that's where a lot of the magic can happen for the viewers or for anybody that's going into the class. So for sure, I'm excited for that. And like I said in the intro, for anybody that's listening, I'm going to for sure put the link there so you guys can get the class and all that. So hey, moving on a little bit, and preparing for the interview, like I said, I basically consumed a lot of your content for the last couple of weeks, and man, I must say that it was real good stuff, especially coming from where I'm at right now, like politically, which is like I'm like a libertarian Latino. I'm like a Ron Paul guy, but I came from like I basically got HBO and started watching Bill Maher as a kid. That's my jam, and I'm still watch him. And whenever he comes to do comedy shows, I always attend them. So, but what I did notice, which was kind of cool, is that we have something in common. Is that when you're engaging and talking with the people you're interacting with, you say fair enough a lot, and so do I, and so do I. And I was thinking that I wanted to kind of get a sense and a vibe off of like that, like the way that I understood or learned fairness was from like watching my parents interact in the world. My dad was an entrepreneur, so I saw the way he treated like his workers and his and the way he and a lot of different things. My mom with her family, and then also by playing sports. I was a sports kid growing up. So my question to you is kind of like do you remember, and how do you develop your sense of fairness, and how does it still kind of stick with you in your life now and in your politics? And do you still remember the one time that you got done real dirty, where you remember like, oh man, that's fucked up? Like I'll never forget that, and that's also stayed with you a little bit.
Yeah, right. So it's a good question. I mean, I think that in some ways, actually, what a little bit of that, right? Like I could probably remember a few of those stories, but I think that probably what sticks with me more so than the sort of times that I feel like I was screwed over, treated unfairly, are times, that like I felt like you know, times that like I sort of realized that I'd treated other people that way, right? You know, and like because I think that you know, I this is an exaggeration, but like I'll sometimes joke that like my long-term memory is just like a gag reel of shit I feel embarrassed about. But the but I guess yeah, like I can, you know, because I can like really remember like times like even just like playing with my little brother or whatever, you know, that like when I sort of realized it's like, oh yeah, that was, you know, that like I you know, I was being a little bit of a, you know, like you know, it's like, oh, you know, I don't know, heads I win, tails you lose, you know, like kind of you know, that like when I could kind of catch myself in retrospect acting that way, you know, that's probably, you know, what stuck with me a little bit more than you know, than the other way around. But that is true, right? Like I have I do say that a lot. I don't know why, but I remember somebody joking a while back that if I ever, you know, introduce different levels on my like Patreon, one of them should be fair enough, you know. I actually had a I don't think this is entirely, I don't think this is true, but I had a ex-girlfriend who used to be convinced that like when I said fair enough, like that was just my way of saying, okay, that all sounds like bullshit, but all right, you know. Like, no,
that's what people have told me. Like that they think that I'm just being like dismissive, and I'm just saying,
no, no,
I'm
I
saying
really
no,
don't.
and I'm saying no. It's just like for me, I don't know. I guess it's a way of saying it's like if we're creating a common law with our
Yeah,
language, and it's I'm just saying fair enough to whatever we're talking about. Let's kind of keep going. You know, like we're all good. We're, you know, it's that's why I took
yeah,
it. But
yeah.
some people
No,
say that
no, I
it,
think I think so, right? I think that like yeah, I think most of the time I say it right. I think I just mean like, okay, I hear what you're saying, you know, that's fine. Like keep, you know, let's keep going, you know, like yeah. But it is definitely something that I say a lot. I mean, I think that um yeah, I mean, I guess also like in some ways the last couple of things you said are a little bit related because like I think I've probably always been, I don't know, not always, you know, a long time, right? You know, been somebody who both like gets bored when everybody's agreeing with each other, right? You know, that like I sort of want there to be some opposition or like what's the point? But like at the same time, I'm not at all somebody who like, you know, like even if I'm doing like a actual, I mean, not like the, you know, the Marx thing, which is like a sort of like, okay, you know, we have different perspectives and that's part of what will make the class fun, but it's also, you know, like, you know, I think that there are, I think the stuff Marx got wrong. I think Thaddeus appreciates certain things about Marx, you know, like it's a, you know, it's definitely like part of the, you know, charm of the idea of the class comes from the fact that that is like, you know, that's just more interesting, right? You know, that you have those opposing perspectives. But I guess but like even if I'm doing like actual like debates or whatever, right? You know, like there's a way that people do that sometimes. I think maybe especially like in the era of YouTube, that's like all about like sort of having the like, you know, I don't know, like snappy clapbacks or whatever. And I just never done any of that shit. Like that's just not interesting to me. Like I don't want to um I don't want to like, you know, win that like 10 seconds, you know, like
yeah.
rhetorically, because what, you know, because what I want to do is to like show you that there's something wrong with the argument or try to get you to see why I see things the way that I see them, or you know, something like that. And so I think that's the kind of combination that like I don't, I'm not like, you know, I've like I've debated some people that like, look, if you asked me like one on one, right, off camera, having a couple drinks, like I would agree, are, you know, pretty shitty human beings, right? Like I don't, you know, but like what I'm talking, you know, but I'm still gonna be like, but I'm still gonna be extremely polite, you know, when I'm talking to them because like I don't really part of that's just personality, but part of it's on purpose, because I don't want the I don't think that that really serves anything, right? To have the focus be on this kind of like WWE but with words, like kind of like like sort of personality clash, right? Like I think it's way more interesting and way more productive if the focus is on like, here's exactly what's wrong with the argument they're making right now.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And like I also think that see, and so you were talking about it in the and having a conversation, but you said you didn't really know why you said it. And I and making this question, I started thinking, why do I also say it? And I guess it's that I really do have this maybe, and of course a lot of people do, but you have this it's in your core that you want people to treat you fairly, and for sure you want to treat people fairly, and since nothing is really perfect in this life, that you just take the punches as they come, and sometimes my fair enoughs are like to concede, like, all right, I'm wrong, or okay, like, so like my thing has always just been about growing in the conversation, not really needing to win them, but you are someone that likes to win. I mean, your show is called Give Them an Argument. And, I like that about your style, because, that's okay. And kind of leading into my next question is, what, you, unless you say you're undefeated, but have you taken some losses where you were like, where somebody caught you completely from a different angle that you didn't even think? And in that moment, did you concede, or is it something that you kind of like let it simmer and like, oh man, like I had to change up my thoughts on something like that? I mean,
yeah, I think it depends a little bit on what you mean. Like, I think that I think there are certainly times that like I'm not crazy about how I did, right? Like I think so. I mean, really, I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking about, but like the first thing that pops into my head is one of the first like debates I ever did. Like I'd done a couple before that were just like kind of on YouTube, but the first the first big one I ever did was actually it's funny. I mean, somebody who's like who's a friend now, I mean, who's actually one of the somebody I disagree with about on 3/4 of things, but somebody I have a friendly relationship with and I respect in a lot of ways, but Dave Smith, I was on his show, Part of the Problem, way back in spring 2019, and he had, and like actually the very first of those debug segments that I did on the Michael Brooks show, it was about the non-aggression principle. And then I, never met or heard of him, but he ended up doing this whole episode that was like responded to that debunk. And then I ended up going on a show, Part of the Problem, to talk about it and, to do a debate about it. And I don't think I was, wrong about what we were arguing about, but I do think that I presented it horribly, right? Like that's all paywall now, which is good for me, that people can't watch that. But I think that like I was approaching it in that conversation, I was treating it like it was a philosophy seminar where you have all the time in the world to just sort of like, hey, here's some crazy example. Let's think about it a little bit and try to draw out some principle. And, then we'll use it, to go back and talk about this. And like in that kind of context, like a debate, a show, any normal person watching that, like that just comes off as evasive. Right. It's like, no, I just answer the question. Right. And so, and I also think, and I also think like he did make some like legitimately really, like I think there was legitimately like a good point that was made that like I think I have a better response to now, than I did then, but like I don't, I mean, it kind of took me a few weeks after, because like at the time there's a lot of ego involved and whatever.
Sure.
So like, I think it took me a few weeks after, and like, and even like immediately after, like his fans would like go after me on Twitter about it. I'd be like, oh, whatever, you're just an idiot. You just didn't get it right. Like that, like, but like, sure, it probably took me a few weeks, for me to kind of admit to myself, it's like, oh no, that kind of sucked. Like that was, like objectively, that wasn't a great performance. So that's the one that like, that's the one that probably most, most comes to mind for that. But like also, I mean, I guess actually this goes back to what we were just talking about, because I would say that probably, and I don't think I'm like atypical in this regard. I think a lot of, I think this, maybe most people are like this, but when I could really only think of a few times like in my life, like never mind like doing stuff like this, where like right in the middle of a conversation where I was arguing with somebody, I was like halfway through the conversation or something, I was like, oh shit, you're actually right? Like that's super rare, right? And I think it's super rare for most people, which is why some people end up with this idea that like, oh, debates are pointless, nobody's ever convinced by arguments, whatever. Like, I'm sure you've heard stuff like this, and I don't think that's right, but I do understand how people end up thinking that it's right. I think that because what they like, the sort of core of it that's right is, well, yeah, I mean, at the time that you're actually arguing about something, there's too much ego bound up in it for you to be able to admit to yourself, never mind anybody else, that you're wrong, like in the moment, right? Like, and even if you're just a observer, right? You're just like a viewer. If you like strongly identify with one side already, then most of the times that I've heard really good arguments for conclusions that I don't like my first reaction in the moment is like irritation, right? It's like, oh, that must be wrong. That's like you're just annoyed by it. That doesn't mean that people don't change their mind. It does, and it doesn't mean that people don't change their mind because of arguments. It just means that we need to have a more realistic picture of how that happens, right? I mean, like I think that all the times I can think of when I've changed my mind, due to like hearing a really good argument against what I thought, it's not really that like you hear it and it's just like, blinding light, oh, okay, that's clearly right? It's more like, maybe it starts to bother you. It doesn't quite seem right, but like it sort of, festers at the back of your mind a little bit. Maybe like a few weeks later or a few months later, like you find yourself thinking back to the subject and you realize that you now feel differently about it. And that part of why you feel differently about it is some argument that like when you first heard it, right, like it didn't seem that convincing to you, right? Like, and I think that's more, that's more probably what's, what's happened to me, like, again, just in general in life. So, I mean, if there's a time when somebody says something like in a debate or something that I think, okay, that like has some influence on me, right? It's usually like pretty slow motion, right? It's not so much that like I'll be able to say like, oh yeah, there was this thing I did last year and that person was totally right, like it's probably.
What do you mean, man? What do you mean? Our wives are always right? They're always right.
Yeah,
they always win. They always win.
Yeah. That might not so much because of the arguments, but yeah. But yeah, like it's. I think. I think it's more that. I think it's more like if that stuff moves you, it's probably going to move you like a little bit at a time, right? Like especially if you're like thinking about this stuff all the time. So it's like probably nothing you hear is going to like shock you. Like, oh my God, I never thought about it that way before. Right. That like, it's going to be more.
I got to admit that listening to a lot of your stuff, I mean, it made me question a lot of different things in a different way. I didn't feel that I
you didn't stop being a libertarian, but
yeah, exactly. But it just expanded the spectrum, not this way, but like all like it just made me grow. Mm-hmm. And the more of the growing I get, then I could still move in your direction in a little bit because I got some space too, and you get to move around in a different way like that. And so that's what I got out of it, and getting a lot and getting into a lot of your stuff. So I hope some of the listeners out there, don't think, oh, because you're come from the political side, you come from that, you can't, jam some of your stuff. It's always good to jam all kinds of perspectives and all that. And when I was first gonna do this podcast, the first original kind of idea that I wanted to do, like the name of it, before it was the Libertinos, was, concede the point, and it was just about people conceding points so they can then grow, and you would see that if both sides concede some points to each other, that there'll be another type of bond or connection that might bring people more together. I don't know. That might be some hippie shit that I was thinking, like, but
No. I mean, I think there's something there. I mean, I think that I think people disagree for a lot of reasons. I think that some of that is because, they just, and in some ways, the part that's easiest to fix, right, is is if you just have different factual beliefs about the world, right? You think something's going to work out one way, and I think it's going to work out another, and it might be hard psychologically, for somebody to admit they're wrong about something like that, but you can at least kind of figure out how to, how you could go about figuring that out, right? But then I think there's also I think that a lot of disagreement is about values. And the cynical thing is to say, interest, and I think there's some of that too, right? But without even getting into that, right? That I think that if you deeply care about certain kinds of goals, you were talking about fairness earlier, and you might have a certain worldview, a certain way that you think about what would count, as a fairer society. Then, not that people don't change their mind about stuff like that, because of course they do, right? If there are tons of examples of that, but I think that it's probably short term, probably what's going to happen more, right, is you kind of absorb some really good point that's been made in opposition, and you think more about okay, how can I kind of accommodate this within within the sort of basic worldview, right? So just to give you a sense of what I mean by that, if you so there's something, I'm sure you know about this, but I mean, just for anybody who's listening who doesn't, there's the something called the calculation problem, which is basically this objection to the idea that you could have a totally planned economy because there's no way for planners to be able to have enough information that they figure out what the there are just too many people with too many different preferences, and it's just there's just no good way, right, to have have people who are formulating economic plans have all of that, right? So that's something that that's something that's hardcore libertarians, people who are interested in Austrian economics, will push that. You're Hayek's and von Mises and and all those kinds of people. And it's a little bit complicated because I do think some of those people really overstate the case about how much of a problem that is, but also that's something that some other socialists over the years are kind of grappling with that, right? I mean, to a certain extent, I'm yeah, okay, they actually do have a point about this, right? I mean, this isn't totally wrong, right? You do have to take this problem into account, but since if you think that, but you've also got this basically socialist worldview in terms of your values, in terms of what you think would count as a fair society, in terms of what you think is wrong with this society, right? You can accommodate that, but without becoming a libertarian or even a centrist, right? You can say, Okay, well, maybe we need some kind of like market socialism where we still have markets in some areas, but here's how they could work or whatever, right? Like something like that. And I mean, my point here isn't even necessarily that that's the right view, but I mean, like, I think it's just an example of how you can, without being too much of a hippie about it. I mean, like you do have, like you do have things that you fundamentally disagree about. There are things that you need to just kind of fight about at a certain point, but like you can say, like, okay, here's this person who has this totally alien view of politics, and I think they're just like deeply wrong about all this stuff. But also, like, I can kind of, you in general, right? The generic you can like listen carefully to what they're saying and figure out if there's anything that, like, even within the basic framework of how you see the world, you could kind of take on board and say, okay, actually, they're kind of right about that, right? So here's how, if I think they're kind of right about this, but I still think all the basic things that I think, how do I kind of reconcile that? And then you probably have like a better, more convincing version of your view anyway.
Yeah. No. Hey, what's up, everyone? It is Monday morning, 7:45 San Antonio time, and I'm already ready to go for the day. But before, I would have not felt as good as I do right now because I went to go do a 2 mile jog, which I normally didn't do under my normal circumstances of my lifestyle. But now that I have been doing a program with BU, that is, as an, you can visit the website buenterprises.com. I am already into my 9th week of the program, and I can tell you right now that I feel awesome. They teach you basically customize exercises and stretches, breathing and relaxation techniques that you can implement into your lifestyle. Please visit buenterprises.com. Use the promo code Chingazos at checkout, all caps CHINGASOS, Chingazos at checkout, and get 20% off any package that you get. I got the 90-minute session and the 12-week program. So I encourage you to check that out and start feeling better about your body and your mental state throughout the day. And over the weeks, once you sign up, also contact me and let me know how it goes for you. I can tell you that it's been going great for me, and I hope it happens for you too. Thank you. Perfect, man. So this leads right into the stuff the notes where I disagreed on some stuff.
Yeah,
There you go.
Nice.
So,
Let's do it.
So like the first one that I kind of like, I heard it and I had to rewind it, and then I had to. I mean, it's just a simple. Okay, so basically, I think, and again, I could be wrong if I heard it wrong, but I guess you're an advocate for ending at will employment. Is that right? Like, or like,
sure. So,
kind of right. You kind of, and then I was like, what does that mean? And then I looked it up, and basically like voluntary employment or
sure. So at will employment is the doctrine that so not all, like, in right now, right, not all employment is at will employment, which is also, like, if that's just a term people aren't familiar with, I can see how that would sound really weird, right, to say that, right, because it's like you shouldn't be like, what, you shouldn't be like deciding whether you're right, it's like at will sounds good, right, you do things that you want to do, but it has a really, that's a term that has a really specific legal meaning, right? So
Okay.
At will employment means that, like, it's not like you're signing a contract where you could only be fired under certain circumstances, or here are the conditions under which it's terminated or whatever.
Okay.
It's just like at will on a day-to-day basis, right? So if you work,
Yeah, I work in construction, and my employees are at will.
yeah, right.
That's
So
it, right?
yeah, so okay, right, exactly, right. So like in that example, right, that if you could basically, I mean, there are still some legal restrictions, but like more or less, right? Like,
Yes, more or less, I can fire anybody if I'm willing, knowing that if it wasn't without all the like warnings and stuff like that, you got to then pay
yeah,
unemployment and pitch in for
Yeah,
for a
right.
while or something like that. But really, yeah, anybody I can fire anybody.
but you could pretty much just fire them.
Yes.
You don't need it's like the difference between it's like the difference between being a made man in the mafia and like just being a wise guy, right? Like if as Henry Hill says in Goodfellas, right? Being a made man means they can't kill you without a sit down and good reason, right?
Okay.
Like if you're just a wise guy, they can pretty much just kill you. That's
Yeah,
you don't have to.
yeah. I never thought of it that way, but yeah, okay, I hear you. Yeah,
You know,
like the business partners that we have definitely can't just get fired. Their interest is a little bit different than just
yeah, right.
the employee that we have. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that so yeah, so like if you yes, there are all kinds of ways in which employment could not be at will, like most obviously if it's like a unionized workplace. So there's like usually some kind of procedure that goes with that, right? That if they want to, if you're if your boss wants to fire you, they have to go through a certain process. It's not guaranteed that it's going to end with you being fired, or yes, certainly like yeah, if you have like partners in like a firm, then like you can separate from them, but it's not quite like you just like announce it to them that day, right? Like the you're removed, you're removed from the business, and just to really quickly like sketch out why, right? I have a problem with at will employment. I think that I mean one way of getting to the problem. It's not the only problem, right? But one way of getting to the problem is to think about doxing, right? Like when people somebody is like somebody's like whatever, like they're like tweeted anonymously, right? And they're exposed, it gets out, right? Like why are people so afraid of that? Well, it's not the only reason, right? You could also be worried that you're going to be like stalked or harassed or something, but like the big one is, oh shit, if this happens, right? I'll lose my job, right? Because like my employer's just going to decide it's like not worth the trouble, to keep me. Or I think if somebody is trying to do something like start a union, right? They're a lot less likely to do that, right? If they're just like, oh, they could just kind of fire me, and like maybe this is a thing that you can't technically fire somebody from, but if you don't actually have to explain yourself, right? Like it's easy to just say, no, I just wasn't satisfied, with his performance, and just kind of leave it at that, right? Like the effect of at will employment is that people are really, look, I mean, it could be that your boss is a wonderful person, as I'm sure you are, and it's and they're just like not worried about it, right? That's like, oh yeah, no, I know Carlos would never like fire me, unless like something unfairly, right? I know he would never unfairly fire me, but fair enough. But then that just kind of depends on just sort of hoping that that your boss is that kind of person. And of course bosses can change, like you have a cool one right now. That doesn't mean that you will, in a year. People move on, new people are hired, businesses are sold to new people, and ultimately you're just kind of depending on their goodwill, right? Like it's like it's like if you have like just a regular monarchy, then well, if the king is a good guy, then you'll be all right. But if the king is, I don't know, I guess I'm mixing up political systems here. This would be an emperor, but like if it's like Caligula or whatever, right? Then you're not, right? Like it's just sort of like you just kind of have to hope that the person in that decision making status is a good person. And so what I think is that we're better off as a society the more that like power relationships are even, or the more at least that like one person doesn't have too much power over another, because I think it's worth worrying that if one person does have too much power over another, like you just kind of have to count on that person's goodwill, that they're not going to, you just have to sort of hope that they're not going to abuse it. And that doesn't, I'd rather not rely on that, right? Like, I always think like, okay, people are always going to vary, right? There's no, some people are always, some people are going to be kind and generous, and some people are going to be selfish and shitty, and some people are going to be in between. And politics can never fix that, right? Like, you're not gonna create better people. You're just gonna have whatever kind of people you're gonna have. I think we're better off like having the structures of society be such that if somebody
Okay.
isn't a good person, they can't do too much damage. So I know that was a long answer, but
No, it's cool. So when you say the structures of society, and when I was talking about, so did these structures get made by the lawyer slash the lawyer class that ends up making the laws that they got to find some work? Like, I'm not saying they got, but there's like some of that where like when those, I guess there would have been groups that, I mean, I don't know, you could check me on this, like, I guess there would have been abuses, and there would have just been somebody like somebody that would have been an advocate for making a law against that, and then it spread out to everything because it becomes a law that it diminishes these interactions that we would have had if those laws aren't there. So they get watered down, like, so it ends up becoming, we're wedging people into, like, I guess the workers and the bosses and all that, but it doesn't always have to be like that. And I would probably think that if you randomly, I mean, and I don't know, if you randomly get 100 small businesses that most people probably are okay with their bosses. Maybe they got some beefs, but they're probably beefs that they might have even worked out if they just communicated more, but maybe they don't because the laws make them have to have these separations because you never want to get sued or this or that. I don't know. Am I kind of answering or questioning the questioning a little bit?
I think I get what you're saying. Okay. So I guess there are like a couple different things going on there. So one is about like what kind of structures we should maybe be worried about, right? Like, and I think this is one of the big, I mean, maybe this isn't what you're saying. If so, you can correct me. But like, but like, I think that when you start talking about laws and sort of class of like sort of lawyers and lobbyists and people who who end up shaping laws, I mean, I guess one thing maybe I hear there is I think one difference, right, between how libertarians often see the world and how leftists often do, which is about whether the sort of only power structures we're worried about, or maybe the ones that we're most worried about, or something like that, right? Like, are like legal power structures, right? In other words, like, we're sort of always focused on like, what's the government doing, right? And that's not totally wrong. I mean, there are definitely some ways in which, like, unless you have some crazy Mad Max level social breakdown, like, that the things that the worst things that a government can do to you are worse than like the worst things that any other institution can do to you. But or even if there's a private institution that's doing it, like, I don't know, like the 19th century, when you have like, I don't know, some like robber baron who has like an army of Pinkertons, like to like, attack strikers, that, government's letting them do it, I guess. But like, but I think the reason that I don't see things that way is that there are a lot of ways in which I think, I think that one, private institutions often like have a lot more, if you don't live in a super authoritarian society politically, private institutions often have a lot more power over your life, on a day-to-day basis, right? That like, that, for one thing, most people, realistically, like, since sadly we can't all be, podcasters and, writers, whatever, like for a living, most people realistically have to spend half their lives, in a workplace. And during that time, you have to do what somebody at that workplace tells you to do, or else, you're not going to keep that job for very long, right? And that's the person who kind of controls your livelihood, right? Like whether you have a way of making ends meet and paying rent and paying for the groceries and and all that stuff. I mean, that gives them a lot of power. And so I think when we talk about structures of power, I don't think we should just be worried about legal structures. I think we should also be worried about economic structures. That's one thing. But then, like, another thing is, and maybe I brought this on with the way I put it earlier, but I think that because I was kind of focused, in my earlier explanation about individuals being abusive, which is, I mean, certainly should be part of the discussion, because that is a thing that's going to happen, and it's a problem, but it shouldn't be the whole discussion. Maybe it shouldn't even be the main part of the discussion, because a lot of times, sure, look, I mean, do most people who work in small businesses, like their boss? Okay, probably, right? I mean, I don't, without like having like numbers, right? Like that sounds plausible to me, right? That could be, because it's somebody you like, if it's a small enough business, it's somebody you interact with all the time, right? It's not like a like CEO whose name you see on like on documents or whatever, right? Like that's somebody you actually know in real life, and probably, and etc., right? Like there are all sorts of reasons why that would be true, but I don't think the main issue is necessarily about who's a good person and who's not. That's a issue, but I also think that I also think there's an issue about incentives, right? Like that a lot of, I think that's a lot of what we need to worry about with stuff like this, that you could have a situation where every single individual who's in the system has the best, has like good intentions, doesn't really want to hurt anybody, all the stuff, but the way that markets work, right? Like you have if if you pay people too much at your I don't know, whatever, let's just do some like cheesy econ 101 example, right? Like you own a donut shop or something, right? Like if you pay people too much at yours, then you're not going to be, then you're not going to be making as much money, and you can't open up a second location. And then the donut shop across the street, that isn't paying people as much, does have that extra profit, and they can open up that second location. And so it's not, it's not so much just a question of individual will, right? It's a question of like, what are the incentives that are built into the system? And I mean, that one was with wages, but I think we could do it with a lot of other issues, right? Where it's not, it's not that the particular, like a particular boss, particular business owner, like has to be personally a bad guy. It's just that, like, if they want, it's like the economic version of evolution by natural selection, right? It's going to tend to select for people who are willing to do certain things, because those are the ones who are going to get ahead, right? So I think that like typically,
could I bring up an example
please.
Well, not an example, was an example, but this was before even I got into like I had seen it, and then it stayed in my head, and then later on I learned like some of the like economic stuff. But I think maybe we can get some a good conversation. So it was like on HBO's like sports stuff, and it was about like about the two Samoas, American Samoa and the Samoa next door, and it was the tuna industry. And basically it was the sports part was about how those two islands, or those islands or whatever, that they produce per square foot most a lot of football NFL players.
Mm-hmm.
And basically they were also talking about like I guess how on the American Samoa side, the tuna industry left once they got like minimum wage laws, and all of those tuna industries just moved to the one that wasn't, that
Right, of
didn't
course,
have the.
right.
So what you're saying is that tuna industry had too much economic power to devastate that
Yeah,
island. Okay, but the initiator of that original power was the law of minimum wage, right? Or like, you know what I'm saying? Like it's
sure,
kind of like the.
sure.
Is there somewhere we can get in there where we talk a little bit and we can give a little bit of points to each other?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, like, I think that
And I could be wrong about that story, but that's the way it was. Kind of like American Samoa.
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not familiar with that example, but that certainly sounds like something that could happen, right? So, um, because if there's an easy way for, if there's, I mean, if a law is passed that, that cuts into, that cuts into some industries' profit margins, and there's some super easy way that they can, that they can just go somewhere without it, right? Of course, they're going to do that, right? I mean, like, this is
it's like going to China, right? Like everybody goes to China for
sure,
same stuff, same thing, right?
yeah, no, for sure. Like, I think that like, this is one of the reasons. I mean, I guess maybe, it takes us back to the Marx stuff a little bit, right? Like, when you say, talk about, like, the capitalist state, right? The idea that the state is going to tend to serve, the interests of the capitalist class, right? The, people, owners of the, means of production. And that's not necessarily, going to be because there's some, like, a bunch of guys in top hats, are, like, sitting in a smoke filled room, like, rubbing their heads together. It's like, this is, here's how we're going to screw over the workers, right? It's a little bit of that, but, like, that's not the main thing, right? Like, one of the main ways that, one of the main reasons why it tends to be true that state policy is going to reflect the interests of people who have economic power is just that, like, nobody has to conspire to make that happen, right? Like, it's just like, well, if they don't like what's going on, then just doing what comes naturally, just like, just like serving their own interests, their own profits, right? There's always that, like, kind of, there's always that, like, business veto, right? That's like, well, if you push us too far, we'll just go to the other one, right? Like, if, especially in a situation like that, where it's like, you don't even have to, I mean, you're in a boat, right? Like, you just take the boat and you go over to the other one, right? It's very easy. So yeah, I think that's totally plausible. But I think it's an interesting story, though, because I think, okay, there are a couple different kinds of power that are going on here. You're right, right? Of course, like, actually, I have no idea how, like, who runs American Samoa on a day-to-day basis, or who anyway, whatever lawmaking body,
Yeah.
is making that, right? That, like, that, sure, they are, exercising some power, in passing that law, and maybe even, like, the tuna industry workers, if they were, like, fighting for that law, right? They're, like, indirectly exercising some power. But of course, who ends up having the most power in this situation? The fishing companies that can just say, all right, see ya, right? And leave, right? Which is why everything, most of the time, for the most part, right, is going to end up, catering to them, right? But I mean, I guess I'd also say, though,
But catering to them slash their customers, right? And
well, sure,
the customers are all of us, right? Or if we
yeah,
buy.
yeah, their customers are all of us. That's certainly true, right? Like, um, but I guess the question is, like, what's the takeaway from that, right? Like, in other words, is it that, because, like, I'll hear people talk this way sometimes. They're like, look, capitalists don't really run things, really, ultimately, consumer runs things. It's like, yeah, in a sense, right? Like, that the capitalist is ultimately, going to be pulled around by market incentives. That much is true, right? But, like, it's also, but the problem is, I don't think it's a really that realistic strategy that, like, you think, okay, well, we want, if you want two to work, fisher, workers and in the tuna industry, to be paid higher wages, right? You just kind of get everybody to not buy the tuna, that's made by the companies that have the lower wages. And I think that's probably not going to happen, right? Like, for a few reasons. One of them is that like most people, uh, like when we're consumers, I think that's the context where we're the most disconnected from each other, right? Like you have, because no normal person who's making a decision about like, do I grab this can of tuna or that can of tuna, is like doing research about like what the wages are in like the different parts of Samoa, right? Like that's not happening. You're just thinking about, okay, this one's 10 cents cheaper, or I don't know, my kid says that one tastes weird, right? Like I don't want to have an argument about this. I'll just grab that one, right? Like whatever, right? That's how you're making that decision. And also like,
is there a little bit of is there a little bit of power in that something doesn't, that you're that the consumer is concerned with making sure they have a good relationship at home with their spouse or their family. That there's a power that I don't even have to worry about the American Samoa. I just want to get some tuna.
Sure. Although anybody in American Samoa who's buying whatever they're buying, right? Like is making the decisions the same way, right? Because I think realistically it's very hard not to. And I think. And I think like even if we pass some law where like every can of tuna had to have like the average wage of a worker at the on the fishing boats like stamped on the side of it, right? Like, which is pretty much the only way people would actually be aware of that while they're buying it. I still don't know that would be like the main thing that that people realistically would probably make those decisions based on, because they're all those like much more pressing things in your life at that moment, right? So this is my only point here, that I think that I don't think that's the place where ordinary people have the most power, because look, if I am, I don't know, I mean, like, if I'm the CEO of, I don't know, Sunkist or whatever, I'm trying to think of a tuna brand, like and
sure, yeah,
that I could just say, hey, we're going to pull out of here because I don't like this or whatever, right? Like I have a lot of power as an individual, but like, you, me, most people, we have very little power as individuals, right? The only power that ordinary people have for the most part to like affect like big policy stuff like this is when we're all working together, right? And I just think that as consumers, that's the context where realistically it's the least likely you're going to be able to get people together in that way, right? I think that the context where it's easiest to sort of get people together to have collective power are either politically voting, or else in the workplace, doing something like organizing a union, because then in the workplace, you're together in the same place talking to each other, and also it's not like you're at you're at Publix and you're looking at the tuna brands, and even if they did have that $2 a day or whatever stamped on it, like if that motivated you, that would just be altruism, right? You care because you feel bad for those people, and don't get me wrong, that's always going to be like some element of any movement for change, that it's never just about like you, it's always about other people, but I think if it's just altruism, I don't think you can really count on that, right? Like I think that
the same way you can't count on the bosses to be you gotta, okay,
yeah, exactly. I think that like movements are most effective if you could draw on people's like self-interest, that you could see like in the workplace example, right? If it's the tuna workers themselves and not like people in like the grocery store in suburban Atlanta trying to decide which tuna to have, but if it's the workers themselves, then it's in their interest, to get the to get the higher wage. And again, don't get me wrong, it's always some combination, right? In fact, this really goes back to what you were saying earlier about sort of developing a sense of fairness growing up and all that stuff. Because I think that when movements are most effective is when most people can see that it's in their self-interest, right? It's going to help them, but also B, that they think that they have like a just complaint, right? Because if it's just about your self-interest, then you can, hey, why not just, if it's only about my self-interest, like why do, maybe I can cut a deal for me, that'll like screw over the rest of these people. But, I could do something that'll just help me. But if it's self-interest, that it's going to help you, but you also think you have like a just complaint, like you think, oh, we're really being screwed over, by these guys. I think that's the combination that is going to be most effective, right? So like even when consumer boycotts do work, which I think realistically they mostly don't, right? But like even when they do work, I think it's usually when those two things are both true. Like the Montgomery bus boycott, that like the people who were boycotting the buses, were the people who were being made to like go to the back of the bus. So there's a sense of self-interest, but it's also like they can see that like morally, they have a good cause. And I think that's what's going to be most effective, for creating change, whether it's like through unions or through politics or through some combination of the two.
And then like in this example, and I don't know what, I mean, this HBO special was like 10 years ago, Brad. So who knows? It'd be kind of cool to see how all that went down. Yeah. But
when we finish talking, I'm going to Google this. I'm curious now.
So then in an industry that big, that created so much unemployment, you, besides advocating for like maybe trying to the unions route, you would also maybe advocate for like nationalizing that industry because it was that important to the islands, or
like, yeah, maybe. So yeah, I mean, I think
like oil, like different things, but this is their thing or something. I
don't want to like sound off with too much confidence because like like the last 10 minutes we've been talking about this example, or the most I've thought about Samoa or the tuna industry, like maybe in my life, so like I don't want to be like, oh yeah, no, this is definitely the right answer to this, but
let's bring it to generality. So like if
as a generality, right, like that's the kind of solution that I would like. That's true, right? Like that. So that I think, and that gets like right to like, I think the core of a lot of sort of like leftist libertarian disagreements, right? Because, because I think that if the way you think about this stuff is primarily through the prism of, property rights, then you're thinking, okay, that the people, the people whose like freedom or unfreedom, like you're really thinking about there, like the owners of the tuna company, and that's just not the main prism I'm thinking about it through, right? Like I'm thinking about the self-determination of all the people who who work for it or who rely on it in one way, in one way or another, that I think that if your goal is to have most people, right, like have as much control over their lives as they realistically can. I mean, it's not going to be perfect because like, there are a lot of us and sometimes our interests come into conflict and, and you can't, everybody can't be free to do everything all the time, but like, you want everybody to have as much power over their lives as they can realistically at a given time. Then I think that sort of like economic power that like, that they, the tuna company, they're deciding how to divide up the profits, right? That like, here's how much goes into new investment. Here's how much goes back to the shareholders. Here's how much you get, right? They're deciding that, and they're making decisions about like, do we uproot this community and like destroy it because like it all relied on this industry, and I'm ultimately like much less concerned about their right to do what they want with their property than like the right of all of those other people who are affected by it to live the kind of lives that that they want to live. And I mean, obviously that's like a huge argument between those two perspectives. I mean, we could do like,
No, I hear you. Yeah, no.
we could do like 3 hours about that, like between now and like 11. We're not gonna, but like, but like that's a big argument. But I think that's where the perspectives would diverge there.
Yeah, and what about so if so we as like kind of like libertarian, I'm speaking for myself, but like since it's real hard to shrink government, so then they'll say, hey, we'll try to get into into power so you can do it. In your side, is there any like conversations about, hey, well, we need to get into the capitalist mind so we can get into the positions of power of these corporate, so then we can advocate for the work, you know what I'm saying, like the same way you get in. Is there anything like that or not? Because that would be my thing if I was on your, I would be like, you know what, then let's figure out how to infiltrate the corporate thing, and then we have to advocate to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm
I think I get what you're saying. I mean, I think like, I mean, this kind of gets back to the issue about like how much the problem is about structural incentives and how much of it is about like individual moral character, right? Because if you think most of the problems about individual character, that like, they're just people who are just bad, selfish people, then like maybe if you could try to get into, like, I don't know, I'm
thinking too individualist, like, and you're thinking of like the structures of the systems that's all of these incentives run. And
that's what I was pushing. Yeah.
Like I can pick one person and that's me, and hey, I'm trying to do good, but you're saying the system and the incentives are going in one direction so much that it can easily catch somebody to do bad, and like something like, is that kind of
no exactly.
And I do a lot of hand stuff, man, but it's kind of the way my brain sometimes thinks.
Well, if you said that you were binging a lot of my content lately, I'm sure you've seen plenty of that too. I talk with my hands a lot. So in fact, I've been doing like remarkably little of it in this conversation. Like usually by now I'd be like, guess if anybody's listening to this as a podcast, they didn't see what I did just there. But anyway, but yeah, I guess, no, that is what I think, right? So like in a way, I mean, not that there aren't like particular situations where it could matter, right? What individuals in what position, because of course there are, right? Like that, like, but then I think over time, right, the way that certain structures work or the way that the incentives work is going to matter more than like which individuals within that, are making the decisions, right? So I think, it's like, to me, it's a little bit like if you were, I don't know, if we were in like, 12th century England, or I don't know, whatever they did, the Magna Carta, like that, like, but we were trying to decide whether we needed to do that, right? Like, and somebody said, no, we just need to have a really good king, right? Like that's all we need to do. And, one of the problems with that, besides the fact that you can't count on that, is that it's like, well, okay, but if he's that good, then like he's not going to hold on to his throne for very long, because there'll be, 3 other, like relatives of his who are willing to like cut his throat and like get in there instead. So probably we're not going to have the, the good king for long. Really what we need to do is just find a way to limit the power of kings, and have like a parliament that they need to do for certain things, whatever. And to me, it's a little bit like the same thing that I think that just having a nicer person, be in some position of power is only going to go so far, both because you can't count on it, but also just because, like, I mean, look, if they're too nice, like, it's not, they're not like, some of this is like corporate propaganda, but some of it's just true, right? Like that there are like, yeah, I mean, if you aren't doing what you can to make as much profit as you can within whatever the rules of the game are as they're set up right now, then somebody else who is willing to do those things is going to eat you alive, and they're just going to take over your market share. I mean, that's actually true. And so that's why I think ultimately solutions can't really be in terms of like, finding better people to replace worse people. I think they have to be about changing the rules of the game.
Hey, what's up? Don't forget to visit our sponsor, palomaverdecbd.com, for all of your CBD needs. Use the promo code Chingasos at checkout, CHINGASOS, Chingasos at checkout for 25% off anything in the store. Once again, it is palomaverdecbd.com for all of your CBD needs. It is a family-run business that my wife and I run out of our home. So we appreciate any support that you show for our small business and any support that you show to this show through purchasing any of our products there using the promo code Chingasos. We appreciate any of your business, and we hope that when you get our product, you feel a lot better and more chill and calmado. Once again, palomaverdecbd.com. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, it's a cutthroat business, and you got to really just take away the sharp knives and tools something like that. Okay, man, I like that. So just to be respectful of your time, I got a couple questions, and then okay, cool. So like, to me, the comedian, I've always since I was a class clown in class. I always cut jokes. It was just, I don't know, it was just my thing to be like that. So it came natural to me. And I always like going to comedy shows all the time since I was a kid. My parents took me to like these shows that were meant for adults. Like when you go to Mexico, they have these shows that are meant for adults, and they thought that I didn't know what was going on, but you could kind of tell. So, but I always respected and thought it was a cool experience. And so you have this and also, like, they push the lines of what can be said. And I've always thought it was unique that inside of the comedy show or that space, there's like there's like a weird vibe of and I've learned this over time as I've been an adult more, like, but like, it's like you get to say things anyway. Anything inside of those walls that you say, you would not be able to say them outside of those walls. So it's like a weird realm in there that has magical kind of powers in a way. I don't know. It's kind of cool. Yeah. But so you have a book where you're critiquing the left from the left because you come from the left. And can you kind of get into what your the book is about, and how people, and how maybe somebody on the right can take some good information from how you're critiquing the left, and they can also self-reflect and also critique their own too, because we need to do that too.
Sure. So the book you're talking about, Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, is it's the last one that came out. There's another one that's coming out like at the end of the year, but that's the last one that came out. So basically that is a book that came out of my frustration with a lot of people who are basically on my side, who basically share, most of my political goals, say they do, who seems to me approach politics in this really unhelpful and moralistic way that actually undermines our ability to pursue those goals. So it's a little bit funny because, whatever, it's 2021, a lot more people read titles than read books, so like, I think for every one of the like few thousand people who actually read that book, there are like probably 10 like who know what the title is and who think like, oh, you must be saying that like people being mean to comedians online is like, the worst thing and the most important problem in the world, and that's ridiculous. What's wrong with you? And in a way, that's kind of the opposite of the point I'm making there, right? Which is that if you're doing something like yelling at a comedian about the problematic things they say or whatever, like that's like one of the reasons I picked that for the title is that like I talk about a lot of things in the book, but one of the reasons I picked it for the title is that like that just seemed to be like one of the most extreme examples I could come up with of like the kind of absurdity of this kind of moralistic approach to politics. Because I like comedy, but comedians, they do not have a lot of power, and like it's if you're and so if you're upset about that, right, then like that just seems like the sort of ultimate expression of this way of doing politics that's all about, trying to sort out like which are the individual good people and which are the individual bad people, which actually kind of goes back to what we are just talking about, right? That I think is a huge mistake, right? So, and I think that you can look, I talk about in the comedy chapter of the book, I use a few examples sort of ranging from, this one isn't really about the left, it's about liberals, but it kind of makes the point, right? From like one of the first things I talk about in the book, just because I found it so strange, right? Is in like the fall, like the summer, 2020, maybe I don't remember exactly, but but there was a point, early in the Joe Biden campaign where Louis C.K. Gave him a donation, and the Biden campaign returned it, right? They didn't want his money, and think, okay, I'm not going to say that Louis C.K. was just minding his own business and for no good reason. People got mad at him, right? Obviously he did stuff that he shouldn't have done, but also there's something very strange about this, right? Because Louis C.K.'s crimes were all about masturbation. Joe Biden was one of the leading Democratic advocates of the war in Iraq that killed hundreds of thousands of people. In a sane world, Louis C.K. would be the one who didn't want to be associated with Joe Biden, not the other way around. And thinking about that example, like I said, that one's about centrist liberals, but that it just seemed to me that there's this really strange thing that happens in American progressive spaces where people treat stuff like this as if it's really important, and that it's really important to decide whether people who are creating different pieces of culture, comedy, movies, whatever, TV shows are, have good values or bad values in this way that leads to this kind of crazy stuff people talking about something that Dave Chappelle says in a stand-up special as if he's running for office and this is his program, instead of being yeah, it's comedy. The way it works is that it's not an essay, right? You're not you're not arguing for anything, right? You're just kind of exploring the sort of weird edges of things. And so I was sort of trying to figure out what's going on here, right? Why are people doing this? And whether it's those Chappelle examples or whatever, or even the positive, cases where people think that something's going on in comedy is really politically important in a good way, right? All of the when John Oliver did his Trump thing, and there were a million liberals who were ecstatic about it, oh, we got him now, right? They what's going on here? And I think that ties in, like I said, that's the first chapter, but I think it ties into the much bigger thing, the rest of the book, which is that basically my take is that the left, people, using that term in a broad way, just anybody who's well to the left of just regular American liberalism, has been so far from power for so long in American society, that you have, even sort of good social democrats like Bernie Sanders, or Jeremy Corbyn in the UK spent 95% of their careers as these marginal backbenchers nobody had ever heard of. If you didn't live in Vermont, you probably didn't know who Bernie Sanders was until he was 100. And the fact that we've been so far from real world power for so long, I think makes it really easy to see politics less in terms of a sort of concrete project to change the material world and more as a just kind of symbolic protest against how bad the world is, right? So I love Noam Chomsky, but if you read a Noam Chomsky book, there's never going to be page 97 he finally gets to if there were a socialist government in power in the United States, here's exactly how it would solve this foreign policy problem, right? Like that page is never going to happen. And fair enough, because in the time that Chomsky was coming up, that would have been so detached from reality, right? It would have been like, oh, well, when I'm the emperor of the galaxy, here's what I'm going to do, right? Like it's, what's the point? But the problem is, where it gets bad is that if you see politics, consciously or not, right? Like not as a real attempt to change the world, but as a kind of symbolic taking a stand, fight a good fight, how to sort of symbolic protest against all the, very real injustices in the world around you, then you stop thinking about what's going to appeal to everybody else who isn't on board yet. And in fact, sometimes you do the opposite of that, right? Like you end up trying to, look, if it's just a matter of like taking an inventory of your soul, right? Like, here's how much I care, then it's really easy for that to shade into spending all your time second guessing whether everybody else who's there cares as much as you do, and maybe they're not really committed the way that you are, and like, have they ever said anything that makes you think that they don't really share your values? And that, I think the ultimate expression of that, from my perspective, is something I talk about a little bit in the book. Michael Brooks and I wrote an article about it for Jacobin at the time, which is the very beginning of 2020, just before the Iowa caucus. Joe Rogan sort of endorsed Bernie Sanders. He did it in a very Roganish way, right? Like, that sort of amiable, slightly stoned kind of like, yeah, man, I think I might vote for Bernie Sanders. He seems like a good guy.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. And so, of course, the Bernie campaign, clipped it and, tweeted out the clip. Because of course they did, because the most popular podcaster in the world, somebody who has a vast audience of people who aren't necessarily even going to vote in a Democratic primary, has just said they're going to vote for you. So of course you will, especially because part of the whole premise of the Bernie campaign was that he had the ability to appeal to people that a more mainstream Democrat, might not be able to appeal to. Which, because Rogan's like a little all over the place politically, right? Like he's a good, like, kind of test case for that. So great, wonderful, you'd think. But then there were all these people who were like mad that Bernie had taken the endorsement, that they say, oh, he shouldn't have accepted or, touted, this endorsement from this, this horrible, problematic person, Joe Rogan. And then they sort of go through and start like, clipping like this, like montage of like all of the worst things that Rogan has ever said in the last, 20 years, and things that might sound really bad out of context, or maybe even some things that are bad in context, but like, and when I see stuff like that, right, or when I see, like, there was this notorious montage of clips I think Tucker Carlson originally put together in 2019 from actually the DSA convention here in Atlanta, of people like reading off these lists of rules for that convention, Democratic Socialists of America, like nobody's allowed to clap because it's possible that, like, out of the 1,000 people there, maybe there are like 3 of them who have some super rare condition where they're really sensitive to loud noises, or all of these like sort of kind of intense, crazy rules. They think, okay, well, hold on, what's going on here? Like, why would people be like this? Especially because it's not like we got this footage from like some hidden camera, Breitbart kind of situation. DSA was streaming it, right, to the world, and everybody knew it was being streamed, and they're still acting like this. So what's going on there? Like, because I've got to think that any, normal person, and I know some people hear that word and say, oh, it's like a dog whistle or whatever. All I mean by normal is person who isn't like immersed in left political subculture, who, doesn't like talk and think about all this stuff all the time, right? Like most people of all backgrounds do not. And, a normal person, if this happens to be the minute that we've got their attention and this is what they see, is going to want to have nothing to do with us, right? Because it's like, yeah, this seems like a bunch of extremely unpleasant, overgrown hall monitors. Why would you want to? Why would you want any part of that, right? Like even people who might, like, if it were presented the right way, right, like might actually be sympathetic to the message, like just like, yeah, no, that sounds like some really unpleasant weirdos there, right? No thanks. And I think that what you see in those clips is people just not worried about that. People, and if anything, it's just about sort of like, proving the depths of your personal commitment. That like, hey, this guy said, started, hey guys, no crosstalk or chatter because of this noise sensitivities, and the next person gets up and one ups them. They say, oh, hey, guys is gendered language. Don't say that. It's like, it makes sense if you think the goal of politics is to prove how virtuous you are, but it makes no sense at all if you think the goal of politics is to actually change, the material world. So like, I always think of Adolf Reed has this, one of the times he was on TMBS, had this, great line, and like, he's this, sort of old man, but he has a very dry, like way of speaking, and like I just remember him saying, it's like, yeah, this is just too Protestant an approach to politics for me, right? This seems to be like all about who's going to heaven and who's going to hell. Like I don't care about that, right? Like I don't care about figuring out who's a good person and who's a bad person. I care about like changing, political and economic structures, that make people's lives worse.
Yeah, that's and listening to you right now, man, there's so many similarities to like libertarians that are like from the right side, but they're out of power, but we just like to like one up each other on all these different things, and all these like, oh, like who's perfect, and like, and all that stuff.
There's the right. I mean, like, actually, there's a direct equivalent there, because there's that classic clip from the convention that nominated Gary Johnson, where everybody's 2016, where like the candidates are being asked about driver's licenses, and and they're why should I need the government to tell me, what's next, that I need a permit so I can, make toast in my own damn toaster. It's like, yeah, clearly, like, what are you doing there, right? You're trying to one up the other libertarian candidates and show that you're like the most libertarian candidate, and it's like, I mean, like, if I actually wanted to advance libertarian policy goals, like I certainly don't know what that would do to do that.
Yeah, no, that's man, that's interesting, because I think some of my people in the audience might like that, especially because right now there's like this new like kind of wing in the libertarian podcasting world that's called like post-libertarianism, where it's basically saying, hey, all of that libertarian stuff, it's pointless. Let's start trying to advocate, like, donating to candidates to win little local offices, and let's see if the principles that we advocate actually can be, put in place. So I'm down with that. I'm like, yeah, like I'm not even too smart enough to even compete with all of those guys that are going to talk about theories and all that. Man, I can't fuck with that. But I don't mind donating a couple $100 to a candidate that might win an office that 7 people vote in or something like that. So I like what you're saying. Like, you're just calling them out, like I like that. Okay, cool, man. I like the vibe of that. And yeah, it's like you'd rather win exactly. You'd rather win the game than just play outside. Yeah, I had this conservative guy, Daniel McCarthy, that writes for forgot which and I gave him the playing field that I saw, and I said, you know what, I said, really, the people that get into politics are kind of like the liberals, and then I said, the referees are like the conservatives that they're supposed to like just call balls and strikes. And then I said, the libertarians are like the hooligans that just talk shit from out there. They're not even in the game, they're just, but there's always room for everybody that to be a part of the game and all that. So, hey man, and finishing up, can you kind of give a final rundown of how that class that you're gonna have with that is gonna go, and then any plugs you got, please?
Sure, yeah. The class is going to be on Tuesday nights in January. All four of those Tuesdays. We've talked a little bit about the reading list. That obviously, there's something a little bit ridiculous about trying to fit like a thinker like Marx, who wrote so much about so many different subjects, over the course of like decades. Kind of try to do 4 sessions. Maybe we could do a longer one sometime, but but we're trying to do like a pretty broad, cross section of texts about, that he wrote about different subjects, politics, economics, history, philosophy. And yeah, like we got into this a little bit earlier, but I think I'm really looking forward to it because I think that, we have obviously, really, like really different perspectives that I'm not like such a dogmatic Marxist. I think he was right about absolutely everything, but I'm basically pro, and Thad is, doesn't necessarily think he got everything wrong, but, he's basically anti, and he's, obviously, he's a postmodernist, and he's very, his politically, I don't know. He would resent being called a libertarian, but like he's closer to what you think than what I think. But yeah, like, so obviously there are those really different perspectives, but what I really value about him is that he's just always somebody that that I can have an interesting conversation with, and I've kind of seen him a little bit in that environment, because he was like helping facilitate the previous class I taught at RU, and so I know how the discussion is going to go, right? That it's going to, there is some some back and forth, some disagreement, but also like that, both of us are going to be interested in kind of like creating space for students to to say what they're going to say, and like make interesting interventions, and I know too that the students who are going to sign up for this class, right, like it's going to be it's going to be this crazy mixture, right, like like that there's it's that there are there are going to be people who who are signing up, who are fans of mine, and and who agree with me about all this stuff. They're going to be, it's RU, so that's like at least 33% libertarians, guaranteed. There's a they're going to be, they're going to be people, there's, and then like, you're just mixture of like people with different eccentric, perspectives, and I think it's going to be like, I think it's going to be really unpredictable. Like, like I don't, like usually, usually if I'm teaching something, I don't necessarily know, like, obviously I don't know like how any particular class discussion is going to go or whatever, like, but I have a pretty good general sense of how the class as a whole is going to go. In this case, I have no idea, right? Like that's part of what makes it a fun idea, that it's like, it's going to be, sure. Like, because of that mixture of perspectives, both from us, me and that, and from the students, and, what's going to come up, over the course of those conversations. Like, there's so much material, like what people are going to end up focusing on. Like it's I have no idea, but like that itself makes it really interesting to me. So that's the class.
Yeah, I'll put a link. I'm gonna put a link in the show notes, and yeah, man, and just please just where anybody can check out your stuff, please.
Yeah. So yeah, the show is called Give Them an Argument. Can find it in all the usual podcast places and on YouTube. And Right for Jacobin, probably, it's way easier to remember a bunch of different things. You can just go to benburgess.com, Burgis, and you can find it all there. And I guess mandatory plug, I do have a new book out at the very end of the year, the end of like New Year's Eve, I think is the official
Awesome.
official release date. So that's Christopher Hitchens, what he got right, how he went wrong, and why he still matters. And that's kind of my attempt to grapple with somebody who I've always found really interested, even when I thought he was really wrong. Like about the Iraq War. Somebody like you mentioned that you were watching Bill Maher from forever ago. Like I'm sure you remember him from there.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. And so yeah, that's kind of, it's gonna, next month is the 10-year anniversary of Hitchens' passing, and this is kind of my attempt to grapple with with his legacy and the stuff he got right and the stuff he got really wrong. And so yeah, I'm excited about that book.
Perfect. Well, thank you for coming on. I hope that you feel that I respected your time.
Absolutely.
And I think that it's awesome that that you came on, and fair enough, right?
Fair enough.
All right, man. Cool, man. Peace, man. Thank you.
Peace.